Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. This interesting-looking little fly is called Jan's Carp Tickler. Although it's specifically designed to catch carp, it also happens to work remarkably well for a wide variety of both warm and cold water fish species. Begin by locating a fine sewing needle or pin and getting it firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise, with the pointy end pointing to the right. You can then load a bobbin with the spool of red unithread. Get the thread started on the flat part of the pin or needle immediately behind the point. Take 20 or so wraps rearward, then back to build up a short little thread base before snipping the excess tag off close. Cut free an 1.5 inch long segment of the red ultra chenille. Place one end of the chenille over top of the thread base and begin taking nice tight thread wraps to secure it. Really put the pressure on these wraps. With the chenille bound down well, get hold of one of the red marabou feathers. Wetting the feather will make it far more manageable. While holding the last 1/2 inch of the feather's tip in the fingers of your left hand, place the feather on top of the pin and continue taking thread wraps, this time to bind the marabou down. Once it's anchored, lift the butt end of the feather up and snip it off close. Continue taking thread wraps to cover the butt ends of the marabou and further lock the feather in place. Reach for your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn back to front whip finish, then seat the knot well and snip your tying thread free. A drop of head cement applied to the thread wraps, then spread around with a fine tip bodkin will ensure nothing pulls free. Once the adhesive dries, the assembly should slip rather easily off the pin, resulting in a nice little fantail at the end of the chenille. You can then remove the pin from the jaws of your tying vise and replace it with one of the short shanked size 8 hooks. Once again, pick up your bobbin and this time get the red thread started on the hook shank behind the eye, and after taking a dozen or so wraps rearward, pull up and snip off the excess tag. A segment of silver bead chain is used for the eyes of the fly to help it sink and to make sure it orients correctly with the hook point up when fished. Place the set of eyes on top of the hook shank, leaving an eye-length space behind the hook eye, and take cross wraps to lightly secure it. Take a full wrap around the hook shank, then begin making over and under yoke-style wraps in kind of a tug-of-war back and forth, side to side. Do a few more wraps around just the hook shank, followed by flat wraps beneath the eyes but over the shank. End with some thread wraps behind the eyes. Pick up the tail assembly and place the snipped off end on top of the hook shank immediately behind the bead chain eyes, and take wraps of tying thread to secure it there. Keep taking wraps rearward to bind the chenille to the top of the shank all the way back to about the hook point. Make sure the material is bound down really well and end with your tying thread hanging at the hook point. Snip an 1.5 inch of the shiny red cactus chenille free and place one end on top of the hook shank. Take tight wraps of tying thread to secure it there. End with your tying thread at the back edge of the eyes. Start taking wraps with the chenille, preening the material rearward as you go to create a bushy little body on the fly. When you reach your tying thread, use it to anchor the chenille, then snip the excess off close. Take a few more thread wraps behind the eyes to build up a narrow collar. Separate 2 strands of red rubber leg material from the rest. With their ends aligned, find the midpoint of the strands and place it on top of the hook shank before securing it with 3 or 4 wraps of tying thread. Pull each rubber leg segment to opposite sides of the fly, leaving 2 legs on each side. Take a few more thread wraps to make sure they're bound down well and oriented correctly. Keep taking thread wraps behind the eyes, then follow with some gratuitous cross wraps around them. End with your tying thread at the back edge of the hook eye. Pick up your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish, seat the knot well, and snip your tying thread free. Trim the rubber leg material to about 1.5 hooks in length. Head cement or UV cure resin applied to the thread wraps around the rubber legs and the bead chain eyes will greatly increase the fly's durability. It's a good idea to flip the fly over and apply adhesive to the underside as well. Jan's Carp Tickler really is a very unique looking fly. The fact that it rides with the hook point up and the tail free to move in the current makes it especially attractive to bottom feeders like carp.